I wrote a little bit in college. I took one writing class my senior year of college. But I think, I didn't know anyone who was a writer. It didn't seem to me to be. My mother wrote poetry, but she would never have sort of made a living at it, or wouldn't have thought of trying to make a living at it, nor would most poets, as a matter of fact. But it just didn't seem quite real to me as a way to, and probably that was a good thing. I mean, I assumed I would have to find a job and make a living, and I also assumed that I would have writing in my life in the same way that my mother seemed to have had writing in her life. And then I remember one day I was opening the New York Herald Tribune, the book review section, when the Tribune still existed. And here was a person who had written a wonderful first novel that was being praised to the skies. And his name was Robert Coover. And he lived in our basement when I was growing up. We always rented rooms in our basement or in our attic because my dad made $2,000 a year or something like that. And Bob Coover lived in our basement for 4 or 5 years when he was in graduate school. And he actually was the secretary for a fraternity, and he was always trying to raise money for them, and he would have these postcards that would get returned to him that he had written out. It would say, "Great Scott, Bob, I forgot to pay my da-da-da-da-da dues." And the idea of this guy, Bob Coover, who was Great Scott Bob, writing this book, which I then bought, of course, probably waited till it came out in paper. But, and it was a wonderful book. It was before he began to write such sort of experimental stuff. It was called The Origin of the Brunists. It was just terribly interesting. It's about the sole survivor of a coal mining accident, around whom a cult builds up, sort of a doomsday cult, the end of the world cult. And all of the sort of social interactions in this town and the arrival of this cult to wait for the end of the world. It was just fantastic. And that was the first time it occurred to me that one could be someone I knew who seemed otherwise a more than completely ordinary person. I mean, we used to laugh at him with his postcards. Could be a writer. And it just was a kind of eye-opener, and I think it changed my sense of the possibilities for myself. Though then I had a child, and then I became a single parent, and then I had to work, and it really wasn't until my son was perhaps 10 or so, and I was in my mid-30s, that I began to try to write seriously. That I had this sort of psychological space, I would say, that he wasn't at the forefront of what I thought of. He was my default mode for many years, because he had a very hard time with the divorce and was a kind of wild kid. But about the time I was 35, I think I just began to think, I'm as good as some of these people I'm reading. And began to, within a year or two of that, send things around.